Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics, and this is the Political Postbox, where we look at some of the more engaged with posts from the past week, and I add my own thoughts onto those. But first, if you'd like to stay notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So this week we've actually got quite a few comments from our happy Brexit supporting community, but not the first one. The first one is on the issue of ID cards. So little comment here, it says every citizen in South Korea has an ID card. Every foreigner not on a tourist visa is also issued an ID card. Your visa status is clearly shown on the card, which denotes your rights as a foreign resident of the country where you can or can't work, right to vote in local national elections, right to own or operate a business, right to own property, etc. Surely not that difficult for Great Britain. It is. I will endeavour to explain why, even though the explanation will not meet with your approval, because I agree it would actually be a benefit. I would love it if everyone were issued an ID card that contained everything you needed. It would be really useful, particularly now that Boris Johnson wants to make sure that people hand over photo ID to be able to vote in the next general election. But that is nothing to do with helping people out. This is all about disenfranchising the poor, who I've already been in a video explaining why it is that in this country you cannot get photo ID if you are too poor. Even what some people would think is, well, it's not that much. It's more than some people, many people can afford. But in terms of ID cards in general, it should be easy from an administration point of view. Boris Johnson has personally pissed away more money than it would cost for the government to issue these things completely free of charge to everyone on vanity projects. So it's not a question of money. It's certainly not a question of administration. Of course, our civil service could easily manage this. It's an issue about the British psyche. We're a bit weird in this country. It comes down to cultural things. Every country really has cultural aspects to its identity that mean it makes some aspect of their lives more difficult. The same would, I'm sure, apply in South Korea and indeed everywhere else. So in Britain, we have this association with ID cards and Nazi Germany. And this causes many, many problems but we've had it rammed down our throats. Oh, British people shouldn't be forced to have ID cards, as if it's a negative thing, as if it's a way on the government keeping tabs on you in a very negative way. We're fine with the government actually keeping tabs on us in a very negative way, but we mustn't have the documentation. We mustn't have that. That would be an outrage. So, and that is what will be used. And it'll be used by two sort of sets of people. So because ID cards would enfranchise quite a lot of the population who would not naturally wish to support the Conservatives argue this. So they push this narrative. The right-wing newspapers in Britain push this narrative. We mustn't have ID cards. It's absolutely outrageous if someone forced us to have ID cards. And they use that word, force you to have this thing. And literally you can argue this to British people. If you were to say, it's outrageous you've been forced to accept £1 million, people will go, yeah, don't you dare give me that £1 million. It's that level of thinking. And there isn't really anyone getting a message out as strongly that actually it will help you out. It's actually beneficial if we could have an ID card that covered everything. I mean, I've just had to do some part-time teaching since I left full-time teaching. I'm doing this full-time now. But I do a little part-time teaching, some covering a different college just to keep my hand in. And I've had to hand over all sorts of documentation to prove that I am who I say I am and that I am entitled to work in this country. And wouldn't it be easier if I just had a card? If I just had a card, that would have been a lot less, because it was hassle as well to be able to provide it. So much of it, and I had to produce so many documents as well. Because I don't have a passport, I had to produce loads off this other particular list, which is not readily available these days because most of the things are, I don't get physical documents like bills and things like that. So I had to print things off online. Oh my goodness. It would be a lot easier, but you'll never get it in this country. Or I say never say never. But the culture will have to change. The way the British culture is right now, anyone, and this is why the narrative is all one way as well, because the problem is there are people who will know that this is beneficial and it'd be really good for us to have them. But they also know that if they stick their head above the parapet, someone's going to lob a stone at it. You know, if they suggest actually we should have ID cards, then everyone else turns on them. They want to force you to have an ID card. Is that what you want? Is that what your grandparents fought the war for? And you'll get it over and over again. And I think we need another couple of generations at least before this nonsense is washed out of our psyche. But that is the reason. So it's not that it's difficult from an administrative point of view. It's not that it'd be a costly procedure. It's purely and simply because we have this nonsense attitude in our culture that stops it happening. That means it won't happen. We have to choose to have photo ID. We mustn't be forced to have it. On to the next one. On to our happy Brexit campers. Oh no, sorry, got this one first. So I was talking in a video about the UK has been falling down the talent stakes globally since Brexit. And someone's saying here, it says, as a side note, you may attract skilled workers. We're going to struggle. We are struggling, in fact. We've seen that. But, very important point, it says, but they often have families. By creating an unwelcome environment for foreigners, the skilled workers will not bring discomfort to their spouses or children. This has literally been the case as well. There have been some very, very highly skilled workers, people at the top of their field, who have left the country because the government have been difficult about settled status for their families. And also, as you say, just in the general environment of wherever they happen to be. There are some regions, even in England, but don't try and imagine this is England with its xenophobia all over the place. There's plenty of places in England where it's absolutely fine. But there are others where it clearly is not. So there was a report a couple of weeks ago about somewhere near Milton Keynes, which I don't expect to know where that is, near Wimbledon. Down south. And a very boring place by all accounts. I've never actually been there, I have to say. But they're having a problem with their buses now. They don't have enough bus drivers because here's the rub. A lot of the bus drivers down that way were Polish. And this has got nothing to do with Brexit. This isn't people going back to Poland because the government is giving them a hard time. What this was caused by was the local population, because the problem is straight after Brexit, there was an increase in xenophobia, you know, as in hate crimes reported by the police along those lines. Straight after the general election, it's gone up again. Every time because you've got to remember, for all those of you who support Brexit and are saying, but it's not for the racist reasons, it's not for immigration, it's for other reasons. Fine. For most people, it is about that. And also the very, very noisy minority of racists in this country, and the racists in every country. Don't try and pretend your country doesn't have them. But what your country may do, if you're not the UK, is keep tighter hold on them. We used to. We used to keep tighter hold on them in this country because it was quite clear to them that their views were not welcome and certainly not shared by the majority in this country. And, you know, humans are by nature pack animals. We like to conform. Some of us like to step above as well, because we have this weird situation with humans, don't we? We want to stand out and be leaders, but we also need to conform. So there's that need to conform has kept a lot of them quiet. But the problem now is because they see there's only one possible reason for voting Brexit, as far as they're concerned, as far as a lot of people who don't really think very deeply about things are concerned, everyone, you know, that does a thing does it for one reason. It's the same reason that they see, which is why you get such a lot of hate, not from everyone, but, you know, from those who don't think very much, to people like me, Remainers, because they can't accept that I have a different point of view and I maybe know things. They just think I'm lying. I see the same things as they do. That's as far as they're concerned. And if I don't come to the same conclusion, then I must just be lying for whatever purpose. They don't know what purpose. That's it. I'm getting paid by Soros. Yeah, that's it. I forgot. Yeah, that's the reason. But that's the nature of it. And because they think that now the majority does believe as they did, they come out with these views. So what's happened in Milton Keynes is people have been coming out with these views, making those people feel very uncomfortable, and they've gone, sod you then, and they've gone back home. And now those people have no buses, or not as many buses. And do you know what they'll be doing? They'll be moaning about the buses. And when it's reported, it's your fault for behaving like that, for behaving like, you know, goodness knows what. Don't even want to say, because YouTube will demonetize the hell out of it. And they'll just go, what? Oh, they can't take a joke, these people. So, yes, you're absolutely right. It isn't just a case of being able to attract the skilled workers and have those workers themselves feel welcome. Their families, if their families don't feel comfortable in the country, then they're obviously not going to want to carry on living here, even if they give it a go. And if they get the view, which may now perpetuate, that Britain isn't a welcoming place, then it will be difficult to attract them in the first place. So I think, you know, in terms of that first statement, you may attract skilled workers. I think we'll struggle. I think we're going to struggle. Okay, next one. There we go. Brexit supporting comment. It says, there is a general view growing that we should concentrate on the deals outside of the EU as they actually want to do a deal. All the EU want to do is frustrate the Brexit process and in general bugger us about, better off laying an ultimatum than concentrating elsewhere. You could not be more spectacularly wrong. Lots of other countries have made it crystal clear to us that they are not going to negotiate a deal with us until we have agreed a deal with the EU. That is particularly the larger economies who already have an agreement with the EU. Because here's the thing. Take Japan. Boris Johnson he's throwing out all sorts of things. First of all, he was going to get his trade deal with the EU. Then he was going to do his trade deal with the EU and the US at the same time. Now Japan is going to be our first trade deal. But oh no, maybe not. Japan have been a bit funny about it. Because as soon as he said that, what did Japan say? Do you want to get a deal with the EU first? So now Boris Johnson is saying, yeah, we might not be able to get that until we get a deal with Brussels. Because that is the issue. Japan has a deal, a comprehensive deal with the EU. Canada has a deal with the EU. Lots of major economies. Even if it's just like with the US, lots of bilateral agreements. The EU represents, without the UK, granted, it now represents a smaller market, but it is still 4 times greater than the UK. So what the UK is wanting to do is go to Japan and say, we want a trade deal. Now, the problem is Japan cannot agree any terms on a trade deal because what if it agrees to some terms that when Britain eventually gets a deal with the EU are inconsistent with that? So it needs to know what is the UK. At the moment, it doesn't know what the UK is, so how can it agree a trade deal? The UK needs some sort of working relationship with the EU, even if it's not a full trade deal, even if it's a series of bilateral agreements, as the EU currently has with the United States, for example. That can work, but we need to know what it is. Japan needs to know what the UK is. And the other thing is, the UK cannot get a trade deal that is as good as the one that the EU has, let alone better. And it's not even just to do with what does the UK have to offer. I mean, I don't know what we have to offer more than the EU. I don't think we have anything, but it doesn't need that argument. The bottom line is this. Let's say Japan was going to negotiate some trade deal that was actually better than the conditions it had with the EU, let's just say. So the EU are not going to sit idly by. You know, this is the most powerful trading bloc in the world. They're going to go to Japan and go, what are you doing? Why are you giving better terms to this smaller customer, just like you would do in a business? You know, if you have a lot of business, your business has a lot of business, a supplier down the road, something like that, and then you hear they're giving discounts, say, to a smaller customer, you'd go over there and go, what are you playing at? Do you want us to go elsewhere? Because we're going to go elsewhere if you're going to play at that game. It may even be, some people have been pondering, I don't know this and I'm not going to spend the time trying to research it because it doesn't matter. It may even be that there are clauses in that agreement between Japan and the EU that basically say you cannot negotiate better agreements with third parties than we have with each other. But as I say, it doesn't matter because you wouldn't need that clause in, I don't think, because the EU will literally just say to Japan, we represent 4 times as much business. And also, we're not led by a donkey. There's also that as well. So, yeah, Japan have actually made it clear we need to get our arrangement with the EU first. Canada have made that clear. Various countries have said we need to sort out our agreement with the EU first. The United States hasn't, but then that's because the United States has got a very special trade deal for us. That actually, they sort of want to know what our relationship's going to be like because they want that relationship to be zero, zilch, gone. So Yeah, this idea, this general view growing that we should concentrate on deals outside the EU. No. This general view amongst whom? Amongst people who know how trade deals are conducted? No, they say the opposite, because those countries are saying, yeah, we're not doing anything with you. They may agree little bilateral agreements. I'm not going to say we won't get any agreements with Japan or Canada or anything like that. Little bilateral agreements, maybe on security issues or something like that, or just smoothing over, customs checks, something like that. Fine. We're not going to get an actual trade deal with them until we've got one with the EU. So no, we actually do have to concentrate on the EU. That's where we have to concentrate. Next one. Another pro-Brexit one. Wishful thinking says, saving industries is against EU rules most of the times. They are the masters until December 2020. Saving industries is not against EU rules most of the time. In fact, it is against EU rules 0% of the time. There is no industry that EU rules prohibit the government stepping in to save. Not one. There are some rules which stipulate that you can't basically keep pumping money into a company in a way that stops its competitors competing. That is true. However, the rules that stop that are not EU rules. They are WTO rules. So the rules that would stop a government stepping in to save a company, let's say, which is not the same as an industry, but a company, would be stopped outside of the EU as well, because they are WTO rules. Okay, there are some EU rules, but not related to this. I'll give you a classic example. So I live in Scunthorpe, which is a steel working town. British Steel has a plant here. I'm still not entirely sure what's going on. It still seems to be rumbling along. However, the owners of it, an investment group, announced that they were giving up on it. The government, they said they blamed Brexit-related issues. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether you believe that or not. I know one part of the audience will and one part won't. Doesn't matter. But they cited that and said, the government's not helping us out. We're going to get shot. The government said that they couldn't step in and buy the company because that would be against rules, EU's rules. This was a lie. And it's a demonstrable lie. I don't have to get you searching through EU legislation. There's no need. What you can do is you can look at another country in the EU. Let's say, I don't know, Italy. And you can observe that a few years ago, a much bigger steelworks in Italy was in trouble. And the Italian government stepped in and bought it. And they returned it back to health and then resold it. So, no, the EU rules do not stop this. I'll tell you what the EU rules do. There are rules. It stops you pumping money into an uncompetitive company. But it does allow you to nationalise industries. In fact, there are EU countries that have nationalised industries much more than we do. We have nationalised industries in the UK just dwindling because we keep voting Conservative governments in. They just blame the EU on everything. That's what we get in this country. We get Conservative governments who know what they're doing is unpopular. It's very different to in the United States. There's a lot of similarities between, the right-wing behaviour in the UK and the US. But what is really different is, in the US, you get the impression that most people are actually naturally right-wing. There isn't much on the left. The two main parties, for goodness sake, are both right-wing parties. The Democrats are not as right-wing. The Democrats are much more like our Conservative Party when it has moderate leadership, not the current leadership. But, the people in this country are a bit more spread, in fact, if anything, slightly more on the left, but certainly a bit more spread around the centre. And as such, these very right-wing policies are not going to meet approval. So what do? They lie about them. And when people go, hang on a minute, well, what are you doing there? They just say, the EU makes us do that. And then, and they'll still use it. In a few years' time, they'll still manage to blame someone else because it is a different culture. So they can't, in America, they can at least be honest. They can, to an extent, they can say, yeah, we're doing this because we hate foreigners, or, we're doing this because we hate poor people. They can just come out and say it. In this country, you can't really get away with that because we don't hate foreigners and we don't hate poor people. Just some do. On to the next one. Again, another one here. So this is talking about the fact that we need more immigration than we already have to fill vacancies to drive our industry. Someone's saying here we have 2 million unemployed. We have more than that actually, but government figures fiddled, but we'll go with it. We have 2 million unemployed. We shouldn't let any workers in, make these work that we have here. So I actually did reply to this person, enjoy having your heart surgery at the hands of someone who didn't even pass their GCSEs, which is your age 16 qualifications for those outside the UK, or indeed outside of England and Wales, because you have different things, don't you, in Scotland. But that's the thing you've got to get around. Yes, we've got a lot of unemployed, but first of all, there's two aspects of it. There's geography and skills. Those unemployed people are not necessarily based where the jobs are. Now, if the government wished to adopt a scheme where it would actually expand the amount of social housing and said, oh, there's a load of jobs going vacant down here, there's a load of people up there that could do them, we will put you up, council houses ready for you here, come down, we'll pay your transport costs, you get your bus fare, come down here, here's a house to live in, there's a job for you to go to. Now, if the government wanted to do that, thumbs up from me, absolutely, I would be fully on board with that notion. But they don't seem to want to do that. So you have this problem with geography. The unemployed people are not necessarily located where the job vacancies are. Next problem is those of skills. Just because you might have in a small area 50 jobs, and you may have 50 unemployed people. Brilliant match. Oh, but those people haven't got the skills to do those jobs. And that's the problem we have. We don't have enough skills. Why don't we have enough skills? Because we have managed to create, after decades of neglect of our education system, a very unfocused education. An education system whose policies have been driven by party politics and not by what is needed to make us more competitive. And the other thing is, of course, that people that do get these skills are usually more welcome elsewhere. So with certain skills, they leave the country because it's very hard to get industries off the ground if you don't have enough. So let's say you have a few people with certain skills, but there isn't the industry in this country to take advantage of them, or they want to pay them a pittance for them. Oh, but somewhere across the sea will pay you much more money, and they've got their industry set up because they invested properly in those skills. You go over there. So you end up just draining it out when we do get these skills. So yeah, geography and skills means that it doesn't work like that. And it can't work like that. This notion of people coming into the country and nicking our jobs, it's an absolute nonsense, because those people need a lot more. It's a lot more hassle for the employer to employ them because they need more documentation from them to make sure that they can employ them. It's much easier to employ homegrown. You don't need as much documentation, and the documentation is easier to understand as well. It's in a format you've seen before. They just don't exist. Don't imagine that because we've got unemployment in this country that those people can do the jobs that we've got vacancies for. They can't. They're either in the wrong place or they can't do the jobs. And it's really not that difficult to understand something like that. I'm sorry. Next one. So why have proportional representation when we can have direct democracy? Could you imagine if we went to the Switzerland system? Actually, if we went to the Switzerland model whereby, they would cancel, invalidate, as they did last year, the result of a referendum if people had not received the correct information, then that would be okay. Yeah, I tell you what direct democracy is in the UK. Referenda. Direct democracy is when the government, and it's conservative governments that do this, it's when the government say, right, we've got this, there's this really popular policy. A lot of people seem to be really keen on it. But we know it's an absolute disaster waiting to happen. But it's really popular and we could be in electoral trouble if we don't get behind it. I know we'll have a referendum. And that way, if people vote against it, then they get to say, you voted against it, so we're not going to do it. And if they do vote for it, as they do with Brexit, then they get to say, right, we're going to do it, but everything bad that happens is your fault because you voted for it. And they're going to do the same thing. Like, at the moment, Boris Johnson is trying to stifle any discussion of Brexit. He's told business groups, he's told his own cabinet, he's told civil servants, they're not to even mention the word Brexit from February the 1st unless it's in a positive context. He doesn't want to hear it. But they'll, he can't stop everyone talking about it. He's not going to stop me. Well, he could stop me talking about it, I suppose, but I don't think he will. But there's going to come a time where it is just seen negatively. And I will bet you one of the ploys they will eventually try, if they've gone through all the others, will be turning around going, well, you voted for it. Which is not true, of course, because what people voted for, what was being promised consistently amongst all the Brexit campaigns, is not this. Not even close to this. Not even a rough approximation. In fact, in many ways, it's the opposite of this. So, because it quite clearly said during the Brexit campaign, we're definitely going to be in the single market. Madness to leave the single market. Now, apparently, it's madness to stay in it. But there you are. But yeah, that's what direct democracy in here is in the UK. It's not direct and it's not democratic. It's actually absolving themselves of responsibility for a very, very bad policy. It's a way of blaming the people. Last one. So, a bit of a sad one, this one. So it says, I'm the son of a Scottish father and English mother. I've always regarded myself as British, not Scottish or English. Yes, I'm the same view. And I've always been like that. I've never actually ever thought of myself as English. I've only ever thought of myself as British. Never even occurred to me. I wasn't brought up to think of myself as English. The only time where being English ever became a thing was in a sporting context, purely in a sporting context. It says here, if England played cricket, I supported them, but I just can't anymore. That is a shame because I still support, for example, all the British Isles when they play cricket. Scotland occasionally plays cricket. Has very bad wickets. You have to be a hell of a batsman to bat in Scotland there. It says, I voted no in the Scottish referendum, but given another chance I would vote for independence. There will never be anything but a far right-wing government in England and hence the UK for years to come. England is becoming as divisive and with an income wealth disparity as much as a little America. It is Tory policies that are destroying any sense of community in this country. And yet, like the American voters, they just keep voting for the people that are making their lives worse. Why do English voters want to destroy my country? So, this bit is certainly true. England, and it is large. I mean, it's not all of England. It doesn't stop at the border with Scotland, and it doesn't start at the border with France, for example, or the Channel. But there are large sections of England where it is becoming like this. It is becoming divisive. This income wealth disparity and people voting for Tory policies, even though it's making their lives worse, is a thing. And it is in England. It's just not the whole of England. And the reason for that, and there is a reason, if you look at, and Scotland's a great example of this, you look at the British newspapers in this country. Some of the worst, most divisive newspapers in this country, if you look at them on any particular day and you compare the English version with the Scottish version, it's different. And that is because ultimately Brexit and everything related to it, everything about these far-right conservatives, has been a steady campaign from the British media, and it has been targeted at where the bulk of the population is. At the end of the day, it's much easier to focus on part of the country than it is the whole country. The downside is that we now get tarred with the same brush as everyone else. Scotland gets to look okay as if it's different because it hasn't had this hard sell on all this bigotry over the decades because there was no need. It represents a much smaller proportion of the population. And same with Northern. There's no point in Northern Ireland anyway. Conservatives don't really win seats in Northern Ireland. Wales got a bit of it just because of overspill, really. It was mostly centred on the southeast of England. With Brexit in particular, they did focus on a few areas in the north of England as well. And also bear in mind there was a significant proportion of the Scottish population voted Brexit too. Again, spillover, I think, there. Because although a decent majority voted to remain in Scotland, it was a smaller number than polls had suggested were in favour of the EU before. Because remember, all the way through the UK, it was a small minority of people that were against EU membership until the Brexit campaign. So this whole attitude has come about as a result of propaganda. And that Scotland has not been subject to that propaganda to the same extent. So what I'm trying to say is basically people in England aren't bad people. They've been subjected to this psychological attack. That doesn't excuse it. It's not an excuse because the right information is out there for people who can be bothered to look it up. They couldn't be bothered. That is down to them and that is their responsibility. And I can totally understand, though I disagree with it for the long term, but I can now completely understand people who would vote for independence for Scotland. I can understand people in England wanting to move to Scotland for when this happens, if it happens. But the last bit there says, why do English voters want to destroy my country? They don't. Even the ones who are doing it, they don't realise the damage they're doing. Because remember, they're mostly damaging themselves, as you know. In fact, someone was linking on Twitter yesterday a little map of this disparity you're talking about and where it hits hardest. And where it's hitting hardest are the regions of England that are voting Tory. It's not Scotland. Everywhere's been hit, don't get me wrong, everywhere's been hit. But actually the worst hit places, not Scotland. It's the regions of England where the Tories have got their grubby little mitts into them. So yeah, I mean, they just don't understand. They think they think the country's going to improve as a result of what they're voting for. They believe that. They're wrong. But they believe it. They're not bad. They're not trying. Some are, there's a small number of people that are deliberately trying to ruin the country. It's a really small number. And you probably don't know them because they live in billionaires' row, if they even live in this country at all. So that's this week's Political Postbox. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe for further content. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.